we're lucky enough to have Joe Nemelka, one of my dearest friends, and he's from Utah. And if you're not familiar with the name, I would think the best small one loft racer in the world. He only has 10, 12 pair of breeders, handful of pumpers, enters the big one loft races with small entries. And how many equal firsts did you have last year?
7.
7 equal firsts in one loft racing last year. He started off this year with already an average speed, couple of average speed wins, right? Amazing, amazing. I enter one loft races with my brother, and it's difficult. So he's going to come. He's going to take questions, and give us some of his tips, and you'll be amazed. But I'd like to introduce you to Joe Nemelka. Thank you for having us.
First of all, I appreciate the introduction. I'm not sure how honest Frank was with some of that. I think there's a lot of extremely competitive, great flyers out there, and Frank's certainly one of them. And many of you are. I know many of your names. It's nice to meet many of you in person. Truly grateful to be here. Frank, when he called me and said, I know you're going to be in town, we had our seminar speaker was unable to make it. Can you do this? I was truly honored to be asked. So thank you. I'll start with this so you can get to know me a little bit. How did I get into pigeons? This is where a lot of people want to know. I actually found a box of my dad's old pigeon stuff in the garage in 1982. So in 1982, I was just rummaging through the garage. I found this box and I opened it up, and there were some pigeon magazines and an old breeding book and some old, American Racing Pigeon News. And there was actually a book in there called Pigeon Fly Home. Some of you may even remember that book. It was an old book, and I read it, and I was like, hey, Dad, what's this pigeon stuff? I want to do what's in this book and get some pigeons. And with him having had the bug before, he'd moved on to racehorses, but he still had a passion for pigeons. Literally, before I even could finish the sentence, he called some of his old buddies, and we were putting some new pigeons for me and in my neighbor's chicken coop, and he was building me a little loft, and I flew young birds in 1982 and did terrible. But I caught the bug, and one of the things that I'm going to say too, I think is really important in our sport. I had some tremendous mentors. I had some neighbors and friends that were willing to pick up this 13-year-old kid and take him training with them and talk to me about vaccinations and actually before vaccinations, talking about medications back then, and how to take care of pigeons. And I'd go to the club and I'd sit around, and you guys remember counter marking night and then figuring races. It's not like it is now, where we just come in and drop our cube and get the race results. We used to have to sit there and pull out the tape and put the counter marks on. I just listened and learned. And I was so grateful for those mentors in my life that talked to me about pigeons and helped me understand pigeons. And I think we need more of that. I see a lot of young guys here, a few young guys here, which is great, but we need to encourage young guys, and then we need to help them. So that's just the thought that I have as I reflect on when I started. I was truly grateful for some of those people. So I started racing in '82. I was active in high school sports, not quite as renowned as Gus, but I played basketball and football. So through high school, pigeons became a little less for me. And then after high school, I got back into it. And then I really tried to compete and tried to buy a few better birds. And so since that time, I raced in the clubs. Then in 2012, and we moved around a little bit with my education and work. So I had to get out of them for a little while we were moving back. And then in 2002, actually, I moved back from London, and with that, I brought some pigeons over, and that's the foundation for what I have now. They're the old Van Morsel Janssens, Burt Brass Pinning, and then I got some of the old Invincible Spirit. Many of you may remember Invincible Spirit that Luella Pigeons bought, the old Arden that was the Barcelona World Pigeon. I brought a couple pigeons down from that, and that was my foundation in 2002, and still found throughout my birds. And then I've supplemented them with some other pigeons or some flyers that I've found that have done good over the years. Florian Hendricks, Joss Goosen, Gabby Vandebelly, Johan de Belzer, Chris de Bakker. I try to find some really good families and some other good pigeons to continue to add what I'm looking for in my pigeon family. I raced pretty well in the club. I mean, with some humility, I'll say I was probably one of the best in our club and competed well. And then as my job changed and I started traveling, I started getting into one loft races, and now that's really all that I can do with the travel, and I really enjoy it. I know some people will say one loft racing is destroying our sport, and I think there's some truth to that. but I would say it's evolving our sport. I would say it's different. I don't hope it's not destroying it. I hope it's evolving it. I think a lot of people that get involved in one loft racing have no other way to be involved in pigeons. Like myself right now, if I couldn't race in our club with my work travel. I'm traveling 2 or 3 days a week almost most months, and I certainly couldn't burden my family, nor would they do it. So it allows me to stay close to the hobby that I love. And so I think if we let it evolve the sport, I think it can be good for both club racing and one loft racing. So that's a little bit about me. I do think one loft racing is tough. I do think you need to continue to figure it out. I think club racing is even tougher. I think some of the best flyers, you've got to be on your game, and you got to put in the time, and you've got to. It's just like most things in life. You get out of it what you put into it. And so I'm happy to talk about both. Certainly for the last few years, I can talk more about one loft racing and some of the things that I've done there, but happy to take some questions and anything related to my pigeon history, the birds that I fly, the success that I've had or haven't had, learnings that I've had. Happy to take some questions. And if not, we're going to have an early seminary, or we'll have an early lunch and auction. See. I actually did. So we were living in London. I was working in London actually at the time for a few years. And so I knew I was coming back to the States. And so I went up to Blackpool. So yeah, so I went up to Blackpool and I met the Mazzarellas, and they had a couple auctions. If you haven't been to Blackpool, if it's an experience. I know Frank's been there multiple times. It's an experience. I mean, you go to this big, huge convention hall, and it is pigeons everywhere, and pigeon trucks, and pigeon supplies, and just incredible. I mean, it makes you feel like you're part of an incredible hobby, which it does. It makes you, because oftentimes over here, we're so small, and even this, the IF convention, much smaller. It's 1,000 times bigger than this. And then every evening and throughout the day, you go to these hotels, and in their convention halls, they have auctions. I mean, you've got all these different big breeders that have got these auctions going on over there. It's fascinating and just amazing. And so I kind of been following some of the results of Burt Brasspenning in Holland for a few years in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I said, if I'm going to get started, I really want to get some of these really good sprint pigeons. And so what happened, though, is the Mazzarellas went over, and as they often do, they bought all of his key breeders, right? And so I said, well, I guess I'm going to be getting them from the Mazzarellas. So I went to the Mazzarellas, and I'd studied. I really knew the strains and families within the Van Morsel and Brasspenning pigeons I wanted. And I bought some direct from the Mazzarellas, and I bought a couple of them out of one of the auctions at Blackpool. And this is kind of what's funny. As an afterthought, I said, I'd like to add some distance blood, and why not buy something down from Invincible Spirit and Desmarg? If you guys know those famous Barcelona lines, I'm sure Frank's nodding over there. He knows some of these. I said, just throw in a cock and a hen. He goes, well, how much? What are you willing to spend? I go, I don't know. What do they cost? He goes, $100. So throw a cock and a hen in. And the hen that I got, she's known as the Arden hen. I would not be anywhere near as successful I've been without that one pigeon. And I spent many thousands of dollars on some of these other birds, and some of them turned out okay. But that Arden hen that I spent $100 on, she's truly the backbone of my family. And then you bring in some of these other birds, and my next best bird, I would say, is Florian, which is a current cock that I'm breeding out of. And Florian was a gift. So I got to know Florian Hendricks, good friend, and I bought a bunch of pigeons from him. I didn't go over there with my hand out saying, hey, I just need you to give me something. I bought some pigeons, and actually one of them died on import. And Florian said, I'll send you something. And he threw this cock in, and I thought, wow, he's a nice bird. And I threw him in with the hen. I got a nice bird out of him. Threw him in with the better hen. The rest is history. It actually ended up being a daughter of the Arden hen, inbred daughter of the Arden hen, that became this key pair that, again, most of what I'm winning with today. So that answer your question? So have you been to Blackpool, Steve? Oh. Yeah, he doesn't do that anymore, as you probably know. Yeah, that Super Bowl convention hall type place where you walk in and it's just all the strains and everything down the lines. Yeah, that was incredible. So cool, great.
The ice cream business over there?
Yeah, what I understand is the dad, Louis, I think it is, he had an ice cream business, sold out for a lot of money, and then he got into horses, real estate, and pigeons. So that's what I understand. So and when he got into pigeons, his goal was basically to go buy the best pigeons in the world, and then mass breed them, and become a breeding farm, and then just distribute them throughout the world. And he did that for a little while with his sons, and I know he's passed on, and his sons are kind of winding it down as well. That's what I understand. Okay, great question.
Yeah, Joe, maybe about 8-10 years ago, you and I and the Jones boys, we were sitting in the backyard at Rod Steinbrenner's at a trip.
Holy cow, yeah.
Your son was there, your wife was there, I think your father-in-law.
My father-in-law and mother-in-law.
They were out in the car. You kept waiting with me. We're looking for birds.
I forgot.
They kept coming a few times, and you kept in a minute, and you finally ended up getting up to leave, and you were drained, like emotionally, waiting for a bird. The passion was unbelievable. And so the question I have is, after putting them through that torment and sitting in the car, are you still happily married?
Yes, but my wife isn't here, as you can tell. So, so no, that's a fun question, and I'll just make it a commentary on that. I think being able to negotiate or navigate the dynamics of a family with pigeon racing is critical. You know, I mean, my wife and my family are my priority. I mean, my son's here right now. He lives in Quincy, works, you know, so this is why when this IF race came and Frank and Guy asked me, you want to put some birds in? I'm like, heck yeah, it'll give me an excuse to come out, see my son, our daughter-in-law, and our new grandson. So we try to tie family events around that, but you know, you got to be careful. There are times when my wife's like, all right, I'm done. You know, we're going. You saw it. You know, we'd waited all day at Steinbrenner's place, and pigeons were slow coming. It was a rough day. And obviously I'd stay until something came or didn't came until dark, but then I had to navigate the, you know what, the family wants to go. I gotta go. So I try to find that right balance. That's one of the reasons I love to enter some international races. Is my wife and I'll go over there, and Frank and I with Robin, we went to South Africa a couple of times, and Dan, and you go over there, and it's the experience. It's not the pigeon event. It's the experience that you try to have with your family, and that's what we have here. So I try to navigate that, but that's funny you bring that up. In fact, my father-in-law told me after that he will never go to another pigeon race, most boring thing he's ever done in his life. And you know what? I just said fine. So I just said fine, and I'll acknowledge that, but we'll take you here. You stay there. I'll take him to a different place, and I'll go to the pigeon race for a little while. But you got to navigate all those different things. Yeah, that's funny you remember that. Matthew remembers that.
I just
I looked at your son. I said, boy, he got big.
Yeah, that was 10 years ago. I think that was.
Does your son have any interest in birds?
right now.
Yeah.
As of right now.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
Whereabouts in Quincy do you live? Right across the street from Quincy Center. Do you really? Stop.
Yeah.
I'm from North Weymouth, so I'm like 10 minutes from my wife's from.
Huh.
Really?
Came out here for school, and now I work here.
You live on Hancock Street?
Basically. So what do you do? You work at Mass General Hospital? Mass General. I work in research administration. Okay, very nice. I work on the other side. There's the Presidential Plaza that's on Hancock Street.
Oh, yeah.
I live in the building behind it.
Okay. Quincy Junior.
Yep. Big hospital. One of my neighbors works there in oncology.
Yeah, so if you want me to start talking about my kids, this will be a 4-hour seminar. I am truly so proud of our kids and what he's accomplished. He's got his master's in hospital administration, and now he's working there. We're all from Utah. So, well, he was actually born in Indianapolis, as you can see the Indianapolis Colts shirt. Yeah, exactly. So our kids were born kind of where we lived. One was born in Kansas when I was in law school. One was born in Indiana. Then we moved to Atlanta. Then we're in Arkansas. We had a daughter that was born in Arkansas. Then we moved to England. And then a son born in England on the 4th of July, which was so cool, by the way. So, and I remind all my British friends that he was born in England on the 4th of July when we declared our independence. That's right. And then our last son was born in Utah when we moved back. I work for a software company. So I'm a recovering attorney. I am an attorney, but I work for a software company, one of the executives there. Yep. Been very blessed. So, yeah, back to pigeons.
Yeah, back to
Try to play by the percentages, okay? So the goal for me is to find those higher percentage breeders as quickly as I can and eliminate the mediocre or the inferior one. So when I bring a new pigeon in, first of all, hopefully I've done a ton of research. And I'm also not chasing fads. Just between me and you, there's a lot of these famous names and these fads, and people chase them and the prices are exorbitant. I try to find those breeders and those birds that are really successful, and they're probably a little bit unknown. Not because I can't afford to pay it, but it's like, why I don't have to pay that. Like Florian Hendricks, I started buying birds from him 10 years ago, okay? I was getting them for 100 or 200 or 300 bucks. Go to them now, you can't get something out of there for less than $5,000. So same thing with Josh Goosen. Josh Goosen, I was buying birds for cheaper from him. Now you go there and it's thousands of dollars. Chris DeBacher, when I bought my first Chris DeBacher bird, it was 2014. Nobody probably knew who Chris DeBacher was. Now, because of Pippa and how successful and other things he does, and Anthony Mays and these other guys, you know, they're really expensive pigeons. So I try one, and Eric and I were talking about this. I try to find them before they're a household name.
So how long do you?
So getting to the point. So I'll bring them in, and if I've done my research, I bring them in, and then this is something I do that may be unique too. I'll take my newest hen, and I'll mate it to my absolute best cock. And if it doesn't produce something in that first year, it's probably gone. Okay, and people are, oh, you should give it another try. I'm like, well, if it doesn't mate with my best cock, my foundation breeder that half my loft is on, I'm not going to try. Okay, now if I bring in a hen and it's not mated to one of my best cocks or hens, and I'm like, okay, I mated it to something that I'm trying and it doesn't produce, I'll probably give it another year, right? So 2 years, but after 2 years, if I don't have anything that's like, okay, it's produced something, then it's gone.
Suppose.
And I don't care what I paid, and I don't care what it's out of, and I don't care. And that's where I think people get caught up. I think one of the biggest things holding a lot of lofts back is keeping these pigeons that they paid a lot of money for, that have these really famous name in the pedigrees, and thinking it's their fault and they're trying this one. I can't find the right click. I can't find the right mate. When I hear that, I'm like, why are you wasting your time? Try something else.
Do you like? I really enjoy old bird flying personally.
That was my favorite. My favorite thing to do. My favorite thing to do in the pigeon sport is old birds, and I fly straight widowhood. I'd love to learn to fly hens. I'm learning watching Frank and this. I just never had the lofts to do it. My favorite thing to do is widowhood flying and old birds. That is the greatest satisfaction I find in the sport.
So the reason why I'm asking you that, it's mine too, is when you have your breeders, you're breeding out of them. What do you look for, like consistency with the young birds? Like, say you raise 3 rounds, you get 6 youngsters out of them, and maybe you have 2 youngsters or 1 youngster out of the 6 that's done anything as a young bird, goes on to fly over, it's mediocre performance, maybe the second year it does a little bit better. How do you judge those breeders for old birds? Because I know a lot of people fly just young birds, but I'm looking personally for myself birds that will carry it on as well.
Well, I can just tell you what I did, whether it's the right thing to do or not. So what I did is again, I have 12 pair of breeders, and this is before I did the one loft game so much, but I would put all my young birds together. I usually have like 60, 65 young birds, and I'm like, okay, I got these young birds together. I would race my favorite cocks out to 150. And then I'd pull those cocks off, and they were done for the year. So, because I was flying widowhood, and I'm like, hey, if I get to the end of the year and I have a bad year, and you guys know what young bird flying is like now. I mean, you end the year with 5 or 6 pigeons. I don't have an old bird team. So I take my very favorite cocks off most of my best pairs, or the pairs I want to prove out, and I'd set them over into the old bird team. And so then they would race widowhood starting as a 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old. I didn't race many birds past 3 or 4 years old because, one, I just think they are not as sharp. They figure out the widowhood game. And then I'd race my hens hard in young birds. And so if I'm evaluating my pairs, I better see some consistency in those hens that we're racing in young birds. And then after a year or 2, and it may be too late, that's why I say I've eliminated that bird. But boy, this cock as a 2-year-old is killing it. Darn it. But then I better see something performing is in the widowhood loft as well. But it's usually 1 or 2. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if I raise 6 or 8 youngsters off a pair, if I get 1 or 2 that's pretty good, that's an amazing pair. And because most of the time, I think most pairs don't breed anything that good. And I also get those pairs that it's a one-hit wonder. I mean, we've all had that where it's like, all right, man, this pair is amazing. They bred my best young bird. It turned into my best old bird. And then I kept them together the next year and got nothing. Kept them together the next year, got nothing. That was just a super pigeon off of an average pair. That's the way I look at those things. I don't know if you guys agree.
Now, do you give every year different mates? Do you change your mates up?
That's a great question. No, when I find a hit pair, I stick with it. And I know that's one of those things a lot of people see differently. But when I find a good pair that's hitting 2 or 3 times, they're together until they die, or they stop producing hit winners. Yeah. And if you look historically, look at what the Janssens brothers did. Look at what who had the red Voss pigeons. I mean, they had that Schoen Vosk, and you find some of the most impactful pigeons in the history of the sport, and they usually had a mate or 2. Look at Koopman, Gentile, and what was her name? Oh, the one that bred. What's Klein Dirk? Golden Lady, yeah, Gentile and Golden Lady. They bred all those super pigeons. So I've found for me, once I find that click pair, I don't split them up.
I have a question. You were saying about old bird flying. So you got your young bird team and you start them out and you're racing them, right? So you said you pulled your favorite cockbirds at 100 after 150?
150 miles.
Why 150?
Well, for me, I just wanted to have enough experience to where I knew that they weren't idiots. You know, I mean, if they're always late from 50 miles, always late from 100 miles, always late from 150 miles, I'm not going to pull them over. So I at least wanted them to be able to show that they have the physical, mental capacity to be a competitive pigeon as they're coming home. And I think you can show that at least at 150. And it was just a decision. After 150, I think you increase the variables of losses too. You know, you hit a tough race at a 200, they may not come home. You hit a tougher race at a 150, usually a decent pigeon can be able to sneak in home. It just was a random based on some analysis I would.
And you fly the hens right to the very end. You push the hell out.
Because I'm never going to use them again, right? And
you don't fly hens at all?
I don't fly hens in old bird.
Only widowhood, that's why.
Yeah, classic widowhood. Yeah. If I could, just to be clear, watching what Frank's doing and watching what my buddies over in Holland and France are doing, man, the hens, they seem to be superior to the cocks and old birds the way that they're flying them. So,
100%.
but that's what Frank is that what you find? So 100%. I think if you really know what you're doing with hens, I think you can do some special things. My loft was organized to fly classic widowhood and old birds. So that's what I did. If I was to get back into it, I would probably build a new loft, put some hens in it just to try it out. Florian Hendricks, I keep mentioning his name. Josh Goosen, I mentioned his name. Those are probably two of my closest friends in Europe, and that's where I get some pigeons from every year or two. They fly classic widowhood. Now, Florian this year, though, built a new loft so he could fly his hens. So he's seeing what everybody else is seeing and the trends related to hens being very competitive in old birds. Classic widowhood is easier, too. I don't know about you guys. If you really know what you're doing, it's an easy system to fly. You get them in shape, and then they just loft fly forever. It's fun. And when you get those hot cocks, they're on fire. I actually have done both. So I'd let them raise a young, and then I'd pull them off after after 10 days after. And then there's times I just let them go down on eggs and pull them apart. And I didn't notice much of a difference. The thing that I like, though, and again, I didn't have a lot of breeders. So if I got a round off of my widowhood cocks, I'm now finding out my next best potential breeders. If I put something on the young bird team and it excels, I'm like, that widowhood cock already bred a good one. So it's helping to accelerate my ability to.
One of my best pigeons ever was bred out of my widowhood.
There you go.
I have no clue which birds that.
Oh no, that's your problem.
One of his hens.
Keep records. I have so many spreadsheets and different things, and I probably go over the top. I would say if you're not keeping good records, you just don't know really what you got. You got to know what you got, and you got to track them. And I'll tell you what's been interesting to me. This one year, I raised two youngsters off of this one pair, and they ended up first and second champion young birds. And I was like, and I used them as pumpers the rest of the, and I was like, holy cow. And what's funny is I didn't really know they were that good until like almost the season was over, because I didn't really care about this pair and I didn't care about the youngsters. And then you get the champion bird report and it's like, wait a minute, who is that off of? You guys have all done that, I'll bet you. And you're like, I'm the idiot. I'm counting on all this stuff being good, but this is the pair that stand out. They became one of my best pairs. So you got to keep good records and know what your pigeons are. I'm not trying to pick on you, Steve, but you just have to do that.
Back to the question John Gallagher asked you, how long do you give a pigeon? I learned something years ago. Myself and Frank Loftwood and Tony Malucci in Addison, New Jersey. Tony was doing an auction on the Blue Howard bird. And I was lucky. I had Tony Malucci for the whole day. That was a long day too. I asked Tony, I said, let me ask you something. What do you look for in a pigeon? He said to me, what I look for in a pigeon before I put it in my loft, a bird that looks intelligent and acts intelligent. That gives you a personality of a pigeon. That stuck in my head. And over my years of breeding, I line breed a lot. I used to inbreed, but I got away from it. Facial characteristics of my very best all carry those traits, and I have to attribute that to Tony Malucci and what he said to me. So I look at my pigeons. I look at them to see how they look at me, how they act. I observe the birds, and I see that for myself. My success is from what Tony taught me. Look intelligent. intelligent and act intelligent. You go in your own lot, you'll see that, how they look at you.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not going to say something different than Tony Malucci. He knows more than I'll ever. He's forgotten more about pigeons. I agree with that. There's certain pigeons that have the look, but again, I think we all can give examples. I remember in my loft one time this bird that used to sit on the bottom perch that I totally forgot about that ended up being my best young bird that day, and it looked like a piece of junk, you know. And so for me, I agree with that in concept, but I also say at the end of the day, they got to produce the results. And this is something that the older that I've gotten and the more experience I've gotten in the sport, this is something I think, I'll say this may be critical. I think the sport's gotten away from this. I used to walk, when I started, I'd walk into a guy's loft and I'd say, Norm Siemens, one of the guys that was one of my mentors, Norm, tell me about that bird. Okay, that bird flew 2 seasons, 6 firsts, blah, 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 blah. Cool, wow, that's a good bird. Tell me about that bird. That one just never delivered. And he's talking about results. And then I walk into this guy's loft. Oh, that was first ace pigeon, second ace pigeon. I didn't know what it was out of, but I could tell you its results. I walk into somebody's loft now. Oh, that's a grandchild of Cannibal, and da 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 da, and that's down from Porsche 911, and that's from Best Kittle, and not saying those aren't tremendous pigeons, but I'll ask, what has it produced? Man, you should see the mate I'm going to get on it this next year. I mean, and not knocking people because there's some super pigeons, but people are collectors of pigeons and collectors of pedigrees now more than I think they are producers of results. That's my own opinion. And I believe that, and I think that's where you got to be careful. And there are some amazing pigeons out there, down from those pigeons I mentioned. Don't get me wrong, I'm going to probably get some texts and calls, you idiot. But at the end of the day, they got to produce results, and that's what matters. And I truly believe too many people are getting into this collector's game. I mean, I get people calling me all the time. Can I get something down from Florian? Well, I got this cock in my breeder loft that's a son of Florian that hasn't bred crap in 5 years. Do you want it? Oh yeah. Like, did you hear the last part? You know what I mean? I'm using it as a pumper. I haven't gotten anything out of it, but it's a son of Florian, right? You know, it's sad. And I know I'm making fun of it and making light of it, but at the end of the day, I raise pigeons to win. And I don't sell a lot of pigeons. And if you want to sell, maybe it's a different game. But I raise pigeons to compete and try to win. And I want somebody to tell me what the results of that pigeon are. I really don't care what its pedigree is. I mean, I do, and pedigree kind of gives you a percentage of chance of performance. But at the end of the day, show me the results. So, sorry, I hope that's not too controversial and people aren't blowing up Frank's phone.
I just want to back you up for a second. Just very short. I had a bird in my one loft race. I liked it very much. I raced it. And I give the bird back to owner. There was a bunch of birds. I'm not going to mention the name. I said, I'm very interested to buy that hen out of you for my own, for breeding, you know. He said, are you like the bird or pedigree?
Yeah.
I said, listen, I just give you the back bird from my derby race. I don't know the pedigree.
Yeah.
I don't want to know the pedigree. The guy asked me, did you like the pedigree? I said, did you give me a pedigree?
No, it's
I don't
true.
want to hear it.
No, it's true. And I think that's unfortunate because I think in order for people to enjoy the sport, they've got to win, right? And after a while, they buy a lot of these expensive birds and they're not winning and they get frustrated and they start to blame other people. I think they need to look at themselves.
What we're talking about right now, one word, manage.
Yeah, that's what I say. Look at yourself.
Whatever. What today, they look at the pedigree, that's going to put them on top. Take the pedigrees, I tell them, rip them up, all up to you now as the manager of those people of pigeons to succeed. And that's what's missing in the sport with the school era today. People in the pigeon game are not managers.
Well, all right.
I'm a manager, and there's a dozen guys here I know personally that are managers. That's why they do well. They don't know how to manage that good pedigree.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that too. And boy, you guys are going to think I'm a negative Nelly. But one of the other challenges I have with certain people right now is you hand them a pigeon and they don't even know how to hold a pigeon. And this is something I really would challenge each of you to get involved in. When a kid comes to my loft, one of the first thing I do is I say, let me teach you how to hold a pigeon. Because they don't know how to hold them. They're holding it upside down. They're holding it backwards. You can just tell they don't know how to hold a pigeon. As a mentor, teach somebody how to hold a pigeon. Teach them what a pigeon's supposed to look like. Teach them what vents are. Teach them what the forearm is. Teach them what the steps and the flights are. Teach them these things. because it's going to die with us if we don't. And that's what people did for me. They teach them about a pigeon. But everybody can look at a pedigree. But you know what? You hand them a pigeon, and they have no clue what characteristics to look for. Well, the tail went up. That's good, right? No, that's bad. Well, it's a big old fantail when I hold it. That's good, right? No, that's probably not good. So please, and I'm encouraging you, please be a mentor to anybody getting in the sport. You're probably going to beat them anyways in the races. There's no secrets in my loft. I'll tell you what I feed them. I'll tell you what I water them. I'll tell you what characteristics I like. I'll tell you what characteristics I don't like. And I'm not going to say I'm going to be any better than anybody else, but I at least want you to be educated and informed so you can try to enjoy the sport. Anyway, I'm getting on a soapbox, but I think right now it's too much about, to be frank, money. It's like if I can tell you this is off of the grandchild of this famous pigeon, I can sell it to you for $1,000.
I would like to know.
Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox, but please be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
I would like to know, like, one pigeon, how many times it's sold. You know, in
Well,
5 years, it may be sold 3 times to different people.
well, and that's where, again, young guys get into the sport or new flyers in the sport, they'll come up to me and say, what do you look for? I'll say, first of all, don't buy any pigeon that's older than 2. Okay, just don't do it. I mean, it may be a super pigeon. I bought super pigeons that were older than 2. But I knew what I was looking for, and it had raced, and it had a great pedigree. But if somebody's got this 2 or 3 year old cock or 4-year-old cock, and they're like dumping it, you're like, probably hasn't been a good breeder. You know, yeah, you don't get rid of your best. So, but then they're say, but maybe they didn't have the right mate. But I'm like, but now you're playing the percentages game, and you're probably playing on the wrong side of the percentages. That's my take. I'll say another thing: give your best birds to new flyers, please. I mean, that's something I try to do. When these new guys are getting into the sport, I tell them, and oftentimes they think they didn't. And what frustrates me is I'll give them this really good bird. It's off of a really good pair, and then they're like, then I find out they went out and spent $2,000 off a child of this, and they're like, but I got nothing off yours. I'm like, well, who you mating it to? Well, this roller I'm using as a pumper because it was a gift from you. And I'm like, come on, man. Anyway, sorry.
How often do you bring back any of your birds from the One Loft Races?
That's a great question. I would like to bring back a lot more of them. Of those 7 first drop birds I had last year, I'm only putting 1 of them in the breeding loft. And that's this year because I didn't have a spot when I got it back last year. And the reason is because it's off a bird that I can't reproduce. Okay, but when you only have 12 pair, that bird's got to be special to knock one of those other ones out. So for me, and people always say, well, the bird that was first ace pigeon in Crooked River was sold. Now it was sold as part of an auction. I was first ace pigeon in the Blue Bucket, and that one was actually sold, but I actually negotiated, and it was sold as part of the Grain Belt auction. You remember that? But I actually was able to swap him because this is a hen, and the mother's getting old, and I was like, can I swap it? And he's like, sure. And I said, look, if you want to take it, it's yours. He goes, I actually want a cock. I said, great, I want a hen. Here's the 7th average speed. That's a cock. I get the first, you get the 7th. He felt like he won. I felt like I won. Because the 7th place bird was one of the ones that I exempted from the auction, saying you get all of them except for this bird, because that one's off of a bird that I was hoping to keep some of the blood. So it's really hard for me to bring them back simply because I don't have the spots. Guy.
So, the breeding season coming up, what are you going to do to prepare your breeders?
Okay, so I'm going to go with a couple different things here. 4 or 5 years ago, I was very low medication. I'd give them a canker pill and vaccinate them, and that's it. Okay. I was actually at the Grain Belt seminar with my friend Florian Hendricks from Holland, and we were talking, and I was asking him what he does, and he hits them with, Baytril, enrofloxacin, or whatever it is, and he says, I give it to him for 10 days, clean them out, and then I vaccinate them, then I do this, then I do that. I'm like, man, I just think that stuff's bad. I think it's toxic. People are always talking about bad antibiotics, and I know Frank has a very strong opinion on this, and I said, well, I'm going to try it. So I did it, and I did well again. So, I mean, again, it's not like and so I keep doing it. So now I give my breeders 10 days of enrofloxacin, and then at the end of that, I vaccinate them for PMV and paratyphoid, and then I give them a canker pill. And then about a week or 2 before I put them in the breeder loft, I give them another canker pill. I think canker is one of the most prevalent issues you need to deal with, and if you're not, then I don't know what you're doing. And people say apple cider vinegar and all these other things, and that probably can help. But I get canker in my breeding loft at a certain time of year, and so I'm trying to prevent it. And I found if I do that, then I can prevent the canker coming into my breeding loft. I think my breeders are really healthy. I think the results prove that. You know, I mean, I wouldn't have 7 first place birds and some of the other things, or first drop birds last year if my birds weren't healthy. But I just think canker is something you got to stay on top of. I just use a pill. Other than when they're breeding, I'll use just one of the canker powders because I want to make sure it gets spread throughout the loft. But when I'm treating, I try to use as much a pill as I can because I know they get the correct dosage. I worry if it's too hot, they're going to drink too much of a medicine. If it's too cold, they're not going to drink enough of it to be effective. So I was using, it's the green box. What was it? Spartrix, the Spartrix. But now I can't get it as much. It seems like it's harder to get some of those, and it's just one of the ones I bought from Jed's. It's the same medicine. It said the same, whatever the medicine type is, but I just use one of those.
You getting it in the old birds or on your babies?
Given the canker pill?
No, the canker sickness.
Oh, in the babies. I get it in the babies.
Babies.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
not on the breeders.
it's not a ton. I don't want everyone to see Joe's loft's full of canker. I mean, I don't get a ton.
It's usually they get it when they get stressed out.
I find when the temperature starts to change and it warms up, we get really cold. When the temperature starts to change and the youngsters are, 8 to 12 days old, I'll get, if I have 12 nest boxes, there'll be like 1 or 2 babies in those 12 in this third or fourth round that may have some canker. And so I just take a preventative action to it. So that's it.
It's not from the parents. That's what I.
Yeah. No, the parents don't have canker issues. Yeah. In their mouth. Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about.
I don't see any of that. Mucus lining, mucus in the crop and in the throat area. And the swabs I've had done over the years, that's where the canker shows up.
Well, so if you're running the test, every pigeon carries canker. You guys know that every pigeon carries canker. And when they get stressed out, the canker has a tendency to shed more in the parents into the youngsters. And if the youngsters aren't quite where they need to be, then the youngsters, the canker can actually cause those little lesions with the cheesy stuff. And it's always in the throat where I see it, just a little spot. And then I'm like, okay, now I got a problem. I'll just tell you, the bird that was first average speed in the Crooked River this year had canker as a baby, but it was a little teeny spot. And I medicated the parents, and I medicated all my breeders, and the spot went away and she won. And I'll be honest, I was like, man, should I send this bird? It had canker. You hear people say, my youngsters have got to be perfect. I'm not sending them to a loft race. For me, it was a little, and I've never done that. I have any bird that's ever had canker, I have never sent to one loft race until this year because I'm like, that's a dang good pair. That's a really nice youngster. Doesn't have it anymore. I'm sending it. So be careful because some of you are going to start sending youngsters with canker to one loft guys. They're going to be really ticked. There was no sign of canker when I sent her.
Joe, being a one loft racer, you really only have, like, say, 8 weeks with your babies before they go to the race. What do you do during that 8-week period, like for vaccinations and like supplements? Because it's really a small window before they get shipped.
Okay, so great question. First of all, one of the things, again, Frank was the one that told me this. I used to just use the traditional red grit. I now add pickstone, mineral stuff, and red grit. So one of these, my birds always have a lot more minerals than they used to have. Remember, you talked about importance of minerals and vitamins. But I'm not around, so I can't tell my wife, can you do apple cider vinegar on Monday? This vitamin's on Tuesday. I don't do it. My water's clear just because I'm not the one that could care for them. So I give them all the minerals in the breeding loft that they'll have. I also give them unlimited Austrian peas. Some people want to have pellets. I have a little basket in there that has, not basket, a little container that has Austrian peas. So my breeders have all the Austrian peas they can eat along with the breeder mix. So then the youngsters get raised. When they're in the nest about 14, maybe 18 days, I will hit them with PMV vaccination. Okay. So then they've been vaccinated once, and it's probably about 18 days. I have this range where I'm like, okay, now they're big enough, I'll hit them with the vaccine. And then some may be 16, some may be 20, depending on how old the youngsters are. And then I wean them, okay, and then I give them a canker pill, a full canker pill. I know some people give them a half a canker pill. When I wean my babies, I give them a full canker pill, and that's it, and then they get shipped. So, and I assume they're going to get vaccinated again when they get to the one lofts. And so that's it. And knock on wood, I think my percentage of youngsters typically in races is as high as anybody. So I think they go healthy and depending upon the race. You got to be careful too, evaluating the race. Oh, I lost 6 youngsters. Yeah, but the race lost 80% of their birds. Is that me or the race? You know, you're always trying to figure out, is it me or the race? And that's something else somebody brought up. I think it was you. The first person I tried to ask the question of whose fault it was is me. What did I do wrong? Okay, did I ship it at the wrong time? Was the baby the wrong age when it was in the race? Was it not healthy? What did I do wrong? Too many people say it's the pigeons or it's the one loft manager. I go through this list of questions for me saying, here's all the things I could have done different. And then if I can't come up with a good conclusion there, then I blame the parents or the one loft manager. But anyway, I always try to be my own worst critic. What's that?
When you do good, so bad.
That's right. That's
A lot
exactly
easier
right.
to get an answer on. Myself, Stevie, and the guys, we have a standard question. What makes a good pigeon? How do you make a good pigeon healthy?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. How to recognize an issue before it becomes an issue. A lot of guys say, don't medicate. In today's day and age, with the variety of birds that go on the truck, you have to do your homework. My program right now, I'm 3/4 of the way through my breeding program right now. Before I get to February, I will touch up on what I need. Get that canker treatment 30 days before. While they're sitting on eggs, they get it again.
So you've got your formula.
Pigeon man does not medicate enough for canker. Tony told me for years, I give 7 to 8 teaspoons of Ridzol per gallon for 5 solid days. I says, how come so much? He said, Vinny, look at it this way. The mafia shoots somebody in the head 4 to 5 times. They make sure it's canker is a one-celled animal. You know, it looks like a polygon. How do you kids that kill that and rid it from the body, the crop, the intestine? That's stuck in the back of my head.
Yeah, again, just keep in mind you will never get rid of canker in your pigeons. They will always have it. But when it gets stressed is when it manifests itself and it causes problems. So I will say, so getting back, I used to medicate less. I'm now medicating a little bit more. I still don't believe, I do believe too many people medicate too much. I think too many people, and they also medicate blindly. Yeah, it's like, oh, my birds aren't racing well. I'm going to hit them with the respiratory. Well, that may not be your issue. They may have cocci or canker. Figure out your issue and treat the issue. That was one thing I learned when I was in Holland, when I was at my friend's house when they were racing. They didn't do a dang thing until they'd been to the vet, and they would post a bird, or they would take all the tests and samples, and they were treating for whatever the vet told them to treat for. They don't go over there and like, hey, I think it's this. And I think in America, we're like, send me everything. Give me the 5-in-1s. I'm going to nail them all. I think that's concerning. I think you're really doing your birds a disservice if you're just medicating and giving stuff blindly. That's, again, my take.
So for these big one loft races, do you find your earlier bred birds, like your February hatches, are better than your May hatches, or you know, which ones for you usually do better in the big finals?
Well, so since I have so few breeders and enter so many one loft races, I have to schedule my one loft races by when they accept birds. This is something people often say, oh, do you plan to send these birds to that race? I said, I have this window, like the Crooked River. I'll use the Crooked River and Blue Bucket as an example. Those are early accepting races. So guess what goes there? My first round. Okay? And if it was my third round that would be better, then I'm screwed. So my point is, I enter the races based on the round. And people are always asking me, oh, when's the best time to enter? I say, I need 7 birds for the Crooked River. Here's 7 that are ready, and here's the 7 that are going. And I know that I'm not trying to be flippant. That's just what way I do it based on the numbers that I have. People often say too, you know, this is my Crooked River pair, or this is my California Classic pair, and this is the birds that do well in the Florida Derby. I don't have that flexibility either. The same birds that win in the Crooked River, the same birds that are winning in the Florida Derby, the same birds that are winning in Cuevas Classic, same birds that are winning in Texas Dash for Cash. I send to meet the entrance criteria. Now, do I believe there's some horses for courses? Sure. I do believe some birds can do better on some horses for courses, but the way that with so few breeders, I breed for the window when they're accepting pigeons. I'm not trying to be difficult or flippant, but that's the only way I can do it to meet the number of birds that I'm entering in the races. Now, having said that, okay, I'll qualify it a little bit. I do try to be earlier in the acceptance period than later. I find that the one loft manager is a little more attention because he doesn't have as many birds. And so if there's something wrong with one of your youngsters, he can hopefully help cure it or get it better or give it some attention if it hasn't found the water. And I also like the fact that if I can get it there early and one of them gets lost right off the loft, that I may hit that replacement window where I can send a replacement or two. So I try to send a little earlier in the acceptance period. Now, one quick thought. So California Classic, John Timmerman, whenever you talk to him, and I love John, good friend, he's going to say, send them early. My best birds in the California Classic are usually the ones I've sent late. Part of it is because he has that late acceptance window, and as I'm sending all the earlier ones out there, that's when I can get them there. So he tells me every year, Joe, I don't know how you do so well with these late birds. I was like, that's the only choice I have to send them there. Maybe if I send earlier, I'd do horrible, or maybe I'd do better. I don't know. So I would listen to the one loft managers too, because John tracks, I think he does, he's told me he does, the ones that typically do well in his race are sent earlier. So kind of listen to the one loft manager and what they're saying as well.
What age?
You know,
Like how many days old?
usually I'm usually later. Some of mine have dropped their first flight. So I like them to be older and totally content and sitting on a perch and eating. And I get some one loft managers like, we should have sent it earlier. Maybe hard to settle, and maybe, but I don't lose too many. I mean, I don't. So I try to get them there later. Now, if they've dropped they've never dropped two. I won't. If something's dropped two, it's like, all right, I'm probably not going to send it. But if it's right between when they're dropping that first flight somewhere in that 45, 55 days, somewhere in there, I tend to be a little older. I don't know. I'm curious. When do you like to send them, Frank?
Well, I think in the past I used to send them too young, but now I'm waiting probably 8 weeks old.
Yeah, it's about the same. Yeah, I think that's wise.
But we have a one loft manager here.
Yeah, what do you think?
Derby, so
What does the best? The best is whatever John said.
Oh, a little older.
Little older because now some of the guys that enter in my race, I'm still not gonna mention the names. Some of my friends are here in this room. They think they enter the bird for the convention race. That's for the end of the beginning of the November. I said that bird, that race is not a convention. It's a one loft race, and I gotta beat the piss out of them before the race has started. We start on the same season as the young bird season. So if you send me a late catch quicker, and at the end of the time that bird has no chance to survive, forget about it performance. It's gonna get sick because it just doesn't work.
Exposed. I'm going to pick on somebody. Jesse's one of the better flyers. I don't know if everyone knows Jesse. When do you send your birds, Jesse? I'm curious.
I try and do the same as you, right around one flight, not more than two. But my Africa birds this year, they got stuck, and some of them were on their 8th.
They still did well. Yeah, so they got but those are outliers. Wouldn't you say those are the exceptions when they start getting?
It's just like I thought I had not really any chance, but they made it there and they flew well the whole course of the way. So it's tough to say.
It's tough to say, yeah.
Do it at a certain time,
But older is better.
Yeah, older's better, but 8 flights probably not better. But that's an exception. Yeah. What do you do for vaccinating and getting them ready? I'm turning this around. Jesse, I'm learning from Jesse now because he's truly one of the better flyers. So go ahead.
I try and do it once I wean them. I'll do the first vaccine for EMV and Rota.
Okay.
And I'll wait 3 weeks and I'll hit them with the EMV, Adeno, and herpes.
Okay.
And then after that, that's it. If they want to shoot them at the race, they do it again. But that's what I do at home.
Got it. Okay.
Around 26 days old, I wean them. Well, put them on the floor. I shouldn't say wean them.
Yeah.
Put them on the floor for 10 days. Then they go over to the next section.
Young bird loft.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually something else I do that some people find is unique. I try to get my youngsters on the floor as early as possible. My loft accommodates that. I don't have any cocks that are going to really just tear them up. I worry about that. I've found if you put one youngster down, it's probably going to get shredded. If you put 2 down, unlikely to get shredded. If you put 3 or 4 down, they're probably going to be okay. And I watch them, but I'm like you. I like to get them on the floor, get them thinking on their own, watching the parents eat. So that's something that I do consistent with what Jesse does. A few more minutes, guys. Yeah.
Going back a little bit about purchasing birds, I wanted to get your opinion. Would you purchase pigeons from a reputable old bird flyer, or would you buy birds for breeding from a young bird flyer, a guy who specializes?
Okay.
What do you recommend?
Yeah, this is me, and I know I'm probably going to offend a whole bunch of people. because a lot of people will say one loft birds produce the best one loft birds. I totally disagree with that. I think you're going to get, I think they can, sure they can. Where I get my birds, and this is why I go get them from Florian Hendricks and Josh Goosens, they are unbelievable middle distance, 1 day long distance flyers in old birds. Okay? If look at Cannibal. I think Cannibal is definitely one of the best breeders ever in any spectrum of one loft or club racing. He was an ace pigeon. Look at Klein Dirk, same thing. And so I find the best birds that give me the best chance of producing good one loft birds are those middle distance 1 day or 1 day long distance, middle distance birds that have performed in old birds. If I can get children off of those, I think I got a good shot of breeding some good one loft birds. And I know some people say one, and I'm not trying to, it can have, I've had one loft birds come back that are tremendous breeders.
Yeah,
So I'm not looking for controversy here, but you're asking me, if I buy a bird, I am less inclined to buy a one loft winner than I am to go buy a child off of this national ace pigeon. In fact, Florian Hendricks, again, good friend, sent me a gift. He had National Harry, first world 1 day long distance national ace pigeon. Okay, he gave me a son of him. So I've had him 1.5 years. First Crooked River ace pigeon, grandchild. 3 money winners in the Crooked River on the other races, grandchildren. Blue Bucket, one of my best birds there, child. And I'm like, there you go. And that proves out my theory, right? If I can get these birds off of these national ace pigeons for these 1 day long distance, I have a good shot. Sometimes they're crap. I've had other pigeons that are crap, but that's what I look for. And yeah, and I know Gannis and Baldwin and Greek, they believe you go get the best one loft birds and they're producing winners. I don't think anybody's done much better than them in one loft races. So take their opinions too. This is my opinion.
With all the vaccinating we give our young birds, Paramexo, Albac, Roto, what does that do for the young bird's immune system as it grows up and develops? Is that a plus for the immune system? Help the pigeon become a better young bird? Or a
Well,
better pigeon in general?
okay, this is my, again,
Everybody is vaccination crazy today. You ask them a question, why you doing it? Well, everybody.
well, I think PMV and some of these other things, I'm gonna equate them to polio. Okay, so let's just go back to the old days with polio. You had to be vaccinated for polio. We basically eradicated polio. I think, and I'm grateful for that. I mean, I've got some family members that have been impacted by polio and some other things. I think if you're not vaccinating for these types of diseases, you're foolish. I think it's unfair to the pigeons. They're likely to get it because is it help? I mean, I just, again, many of you know polio was a terrible thing, right? They vaccinated, it helped out. So I think that's what that disease is. Now, there's other things that we vaccinate for that I don't think are as prevalent, that I think if you left them alone, they'd probably develop their own immunity if they're a healthy pigeon. So are we vaccination happy? Absolutely. But if you're not vaccinating for PMV, you're basically playing Russian roulette. You're just going to eventually get it in your loft and you're going to get wiped out. Because it's just like that disease used to be. That's my take. So I think you got to be very judicious. And there's just a couple of them you just have to vaccinate for. I think you'd be foolish not to.
Do you use pellets at all?
I don't. I know a lot of great flyers that do though, and so whatever. I use the Austrian peas. I know some guys feed a ton of pellets, and I know some guys will give them unlimited access to pig pellets. I use a local mix at a local feed store. They actually just went out, so I'm using some Vercellaga and getting the breeder. What is it? IEC Start Plus or whatever breeder mix. I think it's important to have a good feed, but there's so many good feeds out there now. If you got a good clean feed, I think you're in good shape. Okay. Any last thoughts, questions? Thank you so much for your